In this lecture right now, we want to talk about the basics of supply and demand, where price comes from, and what we mean by equilibrium. So there's two sides, the supply side and demand side. We want to get started and talk about the demand side. Okay, so the first thing to understand is the relationship between a demand schedule and a demand curve. And they're the same information. One is numerical, one is graphical. So let's put a quick up example and take a quick look at it. Right, you're always going to have a price and a quantity. When we look at demand curves, supply curves, that's what they reflect. They reflect a relationship between price and quantity. So we're going to have a list of prices and quantities demanded in the market associated with those, okay? Okay, so this is a demand schedule. I don't know, say it's for Snickers bars or slices of pizza or cans of Coke. It doesn't matter, it's the concept that matters, right? It reflects a relation between price and quantity demanded in the marketplace. So if the price is $6, $7 will be demanded. Now we want to be able to take this demand schedule and go to a demand curve. Okay, price is always going to be on the vertical or y-axis. Quantity is going to be on the horizontal or x-axis. We want to take these numbers and the demand schedule and plot them and create our demand line, our demand curve. Okay, just put my hash marks up here so I know where I'm at on the graph, and I just want to take these numbers and go over to here. Pretty straight, I'd say that's believable, and that's my demand line. Have a demand schedule, a demand line. They both reflect the same information. It's just a different way to look at that information. Okay, and what does the demand schedule or demand line reflect? Well, obviously, in one way, it reflects at a given price how much quantity is going to be demanded, or you could look at it the other way. For a given quantity, what are people willing to pay? So you could look at this as a willingness to pay curve. Another way to look at it is a benefit or a value curve, right? Because why would you pay $6 for something unless you got $6 worth of benefit from it? Unless you thought it was valued at $6. So you can also think about the demand curve as a benefit curve or a value curve. And this is going to come up later on, but I want to go ahead and introduce that now, that this demand curve is a concept that reflects, in essence, a benefit, a gain, a value, right? Economics is all about making things better, gaining more, creating value, and the demand curve reflects the benefit or the value that consumers put on that product. Okay? So, demand schedule, demand curve. Notice one thing about the curve. It is downward sloping. Demand curves will be downward sloping. This is because the law of demand. Law of demand basically says, as price goes down, quantity goes up. As price goes up, quantity goes down. I mean, it makes sense. Whatever you buy, if it were cheaper, you would probably buy more. If the price was a lot higher, you would buy less. Now, there's two reasons for this. One is the substitution effect. So say we're talking about Coca-Cola, cans of Coke. All right, maybe you buy a 6-pack or 12-pack a week or a month. Now, what happens if the price doubles? Well, all of a sudden you say, hey, Pepsi isn't that bad, or I kind of like Sprite, or I like Mountain Dew too. I'll buy those instead. Right? You're substituting Coke for other goods when the price of Coke goes up. So, price of Coke goes up, you buy less Coke, more other things. The quantity demanded for that Coke goes down when the price goes up. Similarly, if there was a huge sale, you go to Walmart and Coke is only $20 a can. Well, obviously you say, hey, Pepsi's great, but Coke is pretty good too. Look how cheap it is. I'm going to buy that instead. Right? You're substituting other goods to buy Coke when the price of Coke goes down. Okay, now a smaller effect, usually the substitution effect is going to be the main effect for most goods. But there's also going to be an income effect. Because think about what happens. When the price of Coke goes up, in a sense, you're poorer. And why are you poor? Well, prices went up. That dollar in your pocket can't buy as much anymore. So in a sense, you are poorer now. So you can buy less. Now, for Coke, the income effect is going to be pretty small, but for something where a lot of your money goes to, say cars, housing, schooling, tuition, things that take up bulks of your budget, they will have a larger income effect. So we're going to have the substitution effect and the income effect. Okay, now we're going to talk more in detail about demand curve, what affects the demand curve, how it moves, and what causes the demand curves to move. But first I want to bring up a key assumption. All right, it should be in your book, ceteris paribus. It's a Latin phrase. It sounds kind of weird. Economists, we like to use these Latin phrases to throw students off to make us look fancier than we are. But ceteris paribus, all it means is all else being equal, all else constant. So if I say, what is the effect on this equilibrium when income goes up? I want you to assume ceteris paribus, meaning nothing else changes. Now, surely if your income went up, maybe other people's income went up, maybe other prices changed, who knows what happens. But I want you to assume the only thing in the world that changes is what is written in the question changes. Quantity, if price of some substitute goes up, that's the only thing that changes, nothing else. You're going to assume ceteris paribus, everything else the same. Okay, now we want to talk in detail about this demand curve. Okay, so let me take these numbers out of the way so it doesn't distract you, because I want to put up a few concepts to talk about this demand curve a little bit more. Okay, I have a generic demand curve. Now, I want to make a key distinction between changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded. Okay, this is one demand curve. Now, the demand curve reflects prices and their relationships to quantities. Right? If I have a price here, that demand curve shows me the quantity associated with that price. Now, the only thing that can change the quantity demanded is the price, because the changes in quantity demanded are movements along a single demand curve. So what's the only way to move up and down this demand curve? The only reason I would buy more or less along this demand curve is if the price is changing. Okay? So quantity, changes in quantity demanded are movements along a single demand curve. And the only thing that affects that is the price. Okay? Now, that's going to be distinctly different than changes in demand. Now, if I say changes in demand, I mean the curve itself shifts. For example, maybe it shifts out now for some reason. Now, what does this mean? At the same price level, now all of a sudden people are willing to buy more. Right? This price, before they were going to buy that amount, now people are buying a lot more. Right? So demand increased. At any given price, we're willing to buy more. If it were to shift back, we would say demand would decrease. See, I'm saying demand decreased it. I'm not saying quantity demanded decreased. When I say demand increased or decreased, the curve is shifting. If I say quantity increased or decreased, you're moving along a single demand curve. That's a very important thing, a key distinction. It sounds just one word, but it's very important because it's a different concept. The only thing that changes quantity demanded, moving along the curve, is price. But we're going to have a list of 5 things that shift demand. Okay? Income is going to shift demand. Price of related goods is going to shift demand. Tastes are going to shift demand. The number of buyers in the marketplace is going to obviously change demand. And also, expected future prices are going to change demand. Now, let's talk about each one of these in turn and how they would move the demand curve and how we would expect this to happen. Now, income. All right, income, we're going to have 2 different types of goods that reflect how income changes demand. Okay, we're going to have normal goods and inferior goods. And those are going to be defined by how income changes demand. Okay, for a normal good, income goes up, demand increases. Say, what's a normal, say, dinners at Chili's is a normal good. Maybe you don't like Chili's, replace it with Applebee's. Maybe you don't like either one, replace it with Bennigan's. I don't know, take your pick. But in general, going out to eat, going to movies, you would consider normal goods. As your income increases, you're going to purchase more of them at any given price. Demand curve is going to shift out as income increases for normal goods. Now, inferior goods have the opposite effect. As income increases, you purchase less of them. Now, what kind of good would be an inferior good? Now, the most common example given in a lot of Econ 101 classes is ramen noodles. Right? Maybe you're a poor college student right now. You can't afford to go out to Applebee's every night, so you eat the cheapest thing you can buy, and that's ramen noodles. Now, I guarantee you, when you graduate, have a good paying job, you're not going to be eating ramen noodles for dinner anymore. Ramen noodles are an inferior good. Your income goes up, you're going to demand less of them. The demand is going to shift back when income goes up for an inferior good. Okay, so depending how income shifts demand, we're going to define two different goods, normal and inferior. All right, so that's the first thing that shifts demand. Second one, price of related goods. This is also going to have two different goods determined by how price of related good changes demand. Okay, we're going to define substitutes and complements. Let's just say subs and comps. I don't want to be sitting up here writing all day. Substitutes and complements, okay? And we're going to define those by how price-related goods affect each other. Now, what are two substitutes? Well, I just named one a few seconds ago in that previous example. Let's say Coke and Pepsi. Now, should be able to see this now. They're substitutes. What happens to the demand for Coke when the price of Pepsi goes down? Well, price of Pepsi goes down, people are going to buy more Pepsi instead of Coke. So the demand for Coke will go down. All right, you follow that? Two things that are substitute. The price of a substitute goes down, Pepsi goes down, people are going to buy Pepsi instead of Coke because it's cheaper, so the demand for Coke will go down. Okay? Similarly, Coke and Pepsi, if the price of Pepsi goes up, people are going to stop buying Pepsi. It's too expensive to buy Coke instead, so the demand for Coke goes up. Okay, those are for substitutes. Now let's think about complements. What's complement? Let's say peanut butter and jelly. I know some people like peanut butter sandwiches or bananas with peanuts. I'm not one of them. I eat peanut butter with jelly. So they're complements for me. They go together. Coffee and cream, they go together. I don't buy cream if I don't have coffee. I don't put cream in water, maybe you do. But for me, they're complements. Now let's see what happens. Let's say peanut butter and jelly. What happens if jelly goes up? The price of jelly goes up. Well, price of jelly is expensive, I'm going to buy less jelly. Law of demand, right? Price of jelly goes up, I buy less jelly. But I only buy peanut butter when I buy jelly, so I buy less peanut butter also. So the price of a complement goes up, the demand for that good goes down. Right? Price of jelly goes up, law of demand, I buy less jelly, but it complements peanut butter, so if I have less jelly, I don't need as much peanut butter, I buy less peanut butter. Okay? The other way, price of jelly goes down, law of demand, I'm going to buy more jelly, but I need peanut butter to go with my jelly, so I'm going to buy more peanut butter. Okay? Make sure you get that, follow that through. There's going to be substitutes and complements depending on how the demand responds to the price of that related good. Okay, obviously tastes are going to affect how demand curves change, right? People now, I guess you can still buy black and white TVs, most people don't, but the demand for black and white TVs are probably pretty low, even if you could find one. But tastes happen all the time. Maybe some of you are really into fashion, and maybe some bell bottoms come in style, all of a sudden demand goes up, maybe they're out of style, demand for them goes down, right? So taste, preferences of people are going to affect how the demand curve moves. Obviously also the number of buyers. If all of a sudden there's more people living, then people are going to buy more of that good. So the number of buyers, which could be reflect just pure population or maybe demographics. We might hear a lot about how medical spending, it can be expected to go up a lot in the future. Well, that's a demographic reason. When the baby boomers are going to be retiring, there's going to be a lot more older people demanding more medical attention. So the demand for medical care is going to be going up. And the last one is expected future prices. Now, why might this happen? Well, say you're looking at TVs, but you know next week or a month from now they're going to have their summer clearance sale. Well, the demand for TVs today is going to drop then because people know that if they just wait, they can get a cheaper price later on. Or if you know at the end of the year, Abercrombie & Fitch is going to raise their prices because price of inputs are going up, then maybe you'll go ahead and buy more clothes now today because you expect future prices to go up. So expected future prices are also going to affect quantity, going to affect demand. Okay, so that was demand. We're going to have almost the exact same type of thing when we talk about supply. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this off the board and we're going to put a supply schedule, supply curve up and start from the beginning again with very, very similar analysis. Okay, again, I'm going to put prices and quantities up. Okay, have my price schedule. Now I need the quantities to go with it. Okay, it's my demand. That's my supply schedule. I will need to be able to go and create my supply curve. Okay, just get my axes ready so I can plot my points for my schedule and create my my supply curve. And there we go, I have my supply curve. Now, this is going to be very similar to the demand curve, right? At any given price, how much quantity are suppliers willing to supply? Or if they're going to supply a certain amount, how much price do they demand that they get, right? If they're expected to sell 8 quantities, well, how much do they expect to get paid for those, right? It also reflects costs. Remember we said demand, yes, reflect relationship between price and quantity as is supply, but we also said the demand curve reflected a benefit, right? Why would you buy it unless you got that much benefit for it? Well, supply is going to reflect cost. Why will they not accept less than $8 for that 8th unit? Well, obviously they won't accept less because that's how much their costs are, right? If their costs are $8 or $7.99, they're not going to accept anything less than $8 to produce that. So a supply curve can be thought of as a cost. And we're going to come back to this again. I want to go ahead and preview that. But basically, supply curve is a relationship between price and quantity that suppliers, that firms are willing to supply to the marketplace. Okay. Now, you should see, obviously, supply curve shifts up. And this, you should have seen it coming, is this because of the law of supply. Law of supply basically just says, as price goes up, suppliers are going to be willing to supply more. As price comes down, firms are going to be willing to supply less. Pretty straight, simple, pretty easy and forward. Now, we're going to have the same thing with the difference between changes in quantity supplied and changes in supply. Just like we had difference in changes in quantity demanded and changes in demand. So let me take this down real quick, just put a general supply curve up so we can talk about how they shift and the difference between shifting and movements along a supply curve. Okay, now again, just like changes in quantity demanded, the only thing that changes quantity supplied is price. Changes in quantity supplied is movement along a single supply curve. So if I have one supply curve, what's the only thing that's going to make firms supply more? Well, if the price goes up. So the only thing that affects quantity supplied is price, and price only affects quantity supplied. Okay? We want to distinguish that from changes in supply. Right? That's different. There's a difference between saying supply increased and quantity supplied increased. Only thing that affects quantity supply increasing is price. But again, we're going to have a list of things that actually increases or decreases supply itself. That actually shifts the curve. Okay? We're going to have a few of those. Right? Price of inputs is going to change the supply curve. Right? I said that, talked about Abercrombie & Fitch and clothing, price of cotton. If price of cotton goes up, that's input to clothing. Supply curve is going to go down. Now, why would that be? Well, think about what does supply represent. Supply represents how much they're willing to supply at any given price, or for any given quantity, how much money they need to get in return for that quantity. Well, let's say price of cotton did go up. Before, to supply this amount of units, say it's 10 units, they would need this amount of money. But now, since the inputs cost more, they need more money to supply that same quantity. Okay? So when price of inputs go up, supply decreases. They need more money for the same units, or for the same price, they will supply less. Okay? So, price of inputs. Also, technology. Right? Obviously, if there's a new way of producing something newer and cheaper, supply is going to move out. Supply is going to increase. At any given price, more is going to be supplied now because the technology is better, it's easier to make. Now, normally we don't move in the other way, but say there was a, mass nuclear explosion and tons of information, knowledge was lost, and technology actually went down. Well, then supply would decrease. Generally, technology only pushes in the one way. As a human race, we do tend to move forward. Okay. So, technology. Also, price of substitutes in production. And what we mean by this is a lot of firms don't produce just one good. Right? Say you're a candy maker and you make Snickers and Milky Way. Well, you can make either one. Well, if for some weird reason all of a sudden half Americans became allergic to peanuts, well, less people are going to buy Snickers. So the price of Snickers is going to go down. So what's going to happen to the supply of Milky Way? Well, they're going to shift producing Snickers to producing Milky Way instead. So the supply is going to move out. Now, this has to do, like I said, because a lot of firms produce more than one good. And depending on what they see in one of their avenues of production will affect their choice of their supply on the other side. Okay, similar to we had the amount of buyers before. Now we have the number of firms. Right? If there's so many people making marshmallows and a couple new firms enter the market, well, then there's going to be a larger supply. Supply is going to increase when the amount of firms in the market increase. And similarly, expected prices. Right? Expected prices. If a company thinks next year they'll be able to sell their product for twice as much, maybe they're going to hold off producing it and wait till next year, supply will go down. If on the other hand, they think for some reason something's going to happen and prices are going to drop next year, maybe they'll go ahead and produce and try to get rid of their inventory today. And they're going to put it out. So that would then increase price. Okay? So these are some basic supply and demand. Now we want to real quick talk about their interaction. Okay. So we've talked about demand and supply separately. Now we want to put them together and talk about how they interact, where equilibrium quantity and price in the market come from. Well, as you might see on this graph, where supply and demand intersect, that's going to define the quantity and the price, the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price in the market. This is the equilibrium. It reflects that at that price, the quantity demanded is the same as the quantity supplied. Or if this quantity is put into the marketplace, the price that consumers are willing to pay is the same as the price that suppliers are willing to accept. Everything's all good. We're in equilibrium. This is where we're going to assume we're going to stay. Now, why are we going to stay here in equilibrium? Well, let's think about it. What if for some reason price was above equilibrium? Let's say price was up there. Let's say price was higher than the equilibrium price should be. Well, what's going to happen is supply and demand. People are only demanding this much, but suppliers are supplying this much. There's a surplus, right? There's more goods in the market than people are willing to buy. So suppliers have all this inventory stocking up, piling up in their warehouses. Well, they need to get rid of it. They realize they can't sell it at this price, so they're going to drop their price to get rid of it till we get back to this equilibrium price. Now, similarly, what if the market price is too low? What if the price is below the equilibrium price? Let's look at where demand, quantity demanded and quantity supply is in relation to each other. People are wanting to demand this quantity. Suppliers are only willing to supply this quantity. There's a shortage, right? Everybody's trying to get it. There's not enough. When suppliers see that, they say, hey, look at these people going crazy trying to get the 3 units that are only left on the shelf. Hey, we could raise the price and we could still sell it. So they're going to raise the price until they get back to their equilibrium. Okay, so the marketplace is naturally, through the price, through the signal, is going to find itself to the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Now, there'll be some shocks where things are going to change, but it'll eventually settle down to an equilibrium price. Okay, so we want to briefly then just finish up by talking about how supply and demand interact when they change. Okay, let's start from the same supply-demand curve, the same equilibrium. Okay, let's think about what happens if demand increases, right? Say incomes go up in a region in the United States. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of these goods? Okay, first you need to remember I said incomes go up. So what do you need to ask yourself? Well, is this a market for a normal good or inferior good? It's going to depend, right? Let's just assume it's a normal good and incomes go up. What's going to happen to demand? Well, incomes go up, it's a normal good, so demand is going to go up. Okay, what happened to the price and the quantity in the marketplace? Well, they both went up. Makes sense, right? Same supply curve, people want more, they're going to bid up the price and they're going to buy a little bit more. Okay, so price and quantity in this market equilibrium is going to go up when income goes up if this is a normal good. Now let's think about something. What would make demand go down? Well, let's say price of a related good went down. Now, first, is the related good a complement or a substitute? Now, I'm saying the price of the related good went down, then if they are substitutes, this demand will go down. Let's take this off and make it a little cleaner. All right, starting the original one, maybe this is Pepsi. Price of Coke goes down. People buy more Coke instead of Pepsi, so the demand for Pepsi goes down. So what happens? Equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price both went down because the demand decreased. Okay? So that's how changes in demand affect the equilibrium quantity and price. Now let's talk about supply. How do things change when supply changes? Okay, let's see, what would make supply go up? Well, the easiest thing would be to say technology increased, right? Say maybe this is a market for corn and a new genetically modified seed came out next year, the harvest is going to be better, supply is going to go up. Have the wrong place marked. Okay, we have a new supply curve. Technology increased, supply moved out, supply increased. What happened to the equilibrium price and quantity? Well, notice the quantity went up, just like when demand went up. But now, since supply went up, the price went down. Okay? So when just demand goes up, price and quantity in the market go up. When demand goes down, price and quantity went down. But what happened when supply went up? Quantity went up, price went down. Okay? So you keep that in mind and think through this. Okay, let's do a quick example then. One more when supply goes down. Make sure we see what's going on. Okay. What's going to make supply go down? Look over your notes. What's something that's going to make supply go down? Okay? Maybe price of inputs went up, right? Price of labor went up, price of cotton went up, price of gas went up. That's going to cause a decrease in supply because it costs them more to supply that. So at any given price, they're going to supply less. For any quantity, they're going to demand a higher price. Okay, so price of the input went up, supply is going to go down. So what happened? Quantity went down, right? Just like when demand goes down, quantity goes down. But here, when supply decreases, price goes up. Okay? So when just supply moves, quantity and price act in opposite directions. When just demand moves, quantity and price go in the same direction. Okay? Go through maybe a few examples, make sure you understand this. But before we finish up, I want you to see one more thing, maybe two more things, so you don't get confused maybe later on. Okay, now what if both supply and demand change for some reason? All right, what's going to happen then? Let's say supply goes up and demand goes down. Remember, that was our original point. Now we're at our new point. Now, what happened to price? Well, what happens? We said supply went up. When supply goes up, how does supply change price? When supply goes up, price goes down, right? And we said demand went down. Well, what happens to price when demand goes down? Price goes down. So both the supply movement and the demand movement caused price to go down. So price definitely went down. But what about the quantity? Now, the way I've drawn it, you almost can't tell. It looks like it didn't change at all. But this is just the way I've drawn it. Now, what happens to quantity when supply goes up? Remember? Supply goes up, quantity goes up. Right? But what happens to quantity when demand goes down? Quantity goes down. So the movement in the supply curve on quantity, how it affects quantity, is different than how my movement in this demand curve affects quantity. Right? Supply went up, it would tend to push quantity higher. But demand went down, it would tend to push quantity in the marketplace lower. So they have counteracting effects. So unless I give you more information and say which one moved more, you really can't say what happened to the quantity in the marketplace. You definitely know the price changed, right? Because they both had the same effect on price. But you don't know quantity because they had opposite effects. Now, obviously, there's going to be 4 ways this can happen. Supply goes up and demand goes up, supply down and demand down. They both go in counteracting forces. The point is, and if you have one of these questions, you need to stop and think. When the way the supply curve is moving does that affect price or quantity the same way the demand curve is moving? And if they have counteracting forces, unless you know the magnitude of the effect, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So if you get a question and they give you an example where supply and demand curve both change, make sure to take your time, draw them up here, and think, are they both having the same or different effects on price and quantity? Okay, that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and just wrap up, make sure we understand what we did today. So remember, took about basic demand, demand schedule, demand curve, talked about the law of demand, talked about the difference between shift in demand, increase in demand, decrease in demand, and changes in quantity demanded. Okay, they're different. Only thing that changes quantity demanded is price. We list those 5 things that actually shift demand. One of them was income. We defined a normal and inferior good. Other was related goods, defined substitutes and complements. Similarly with supply, we had supply schedule, supply curve. We talked about the law of supply. Again, the difference between changes in quantity supplied and actual changes in supply. Okay, only price changes quantity supplied, whereas those list of 5 things actually change supply. Then, looking when they interact, make sure you understand if one curve moves, how price and quantity move, versus if both they move, how to work through that type of problem. Okay.